Are you sure you're in the right seat, sir? The pilot's voice cut through the cabin, calm on the surface, but laced with something colder underneath. Leonard Cross didn't flinch. He simply raised his boarding pass, looked the man in the eye, and said, "That's what it says." Dallas-Fort Worth was unusually still that morning, the kind of stillness that happens between early departures and the late rising rush. Gate A18 glowed under artificial lights as soft announcements hummed overhead and the smell of cinnamon coffee drifted from a nearby kiosk. Leonard Cross stood near the window, watching the sunrise crack gently over the tarmac. At 59, he moved with a quiet intentionality, every step, every glance, as measured as the lessons he'd once taught in school board meetings and staff development seminars. He wasn't dressed to impress, but to affirm something in himself. Charcoal blazer. Crisp, pale gray slacks. A dark leather watch that used to belong to his older brother. In his hand, a small, worn copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Not a showpiece, just a reminder. Of history. Of dignity. Of the battles he'd already fought and the ones that still whispered in certain corners of this country. His boarding pass read Seat 2A, First Class. Flight 762 to San Francisco. A short trip, just a few hours in the air, but a long time coming. Leonard hadn't traveled much since retiring. 36 years in public education, the last 10 as superintendent of Charlotte Public Schools, had left him little time for anything else. This trip was a promise he made to himself the day he turned in his final district-wide report. No meetings. No phone calls. Just the sky, a window seat, and some Baldwin. He liked the stillness of that. The permission to be still. When the boarding call was made, he nodded politely to the gate agent, stepped through the tunnel, and greeted the flight attendant at the cabin door with a low, gentle good morning. She blinked at him, half distracted, and returned a mechanical smile. He made his way to the second row, right side. Leather seats. Brushed steel armrests. A little more legroom than he needed, but not more than he'd earned. He folded his jacket neatly over his lap, slipped his book onto the tray, and took a slow breath. The cabin filled gradually. Passengers murmured in soft conversations, exchanged nods, shuffled bags into overhead bins. Then, 10 minutes before departure, came the man with the too white smile and mirror-shined shoes. Captain Evan McAllister, mid-40s, tall, sharp-angled jaw, the kind of man who walked like he'd never been questioned in his life. Sunglasses still on indoors. Clipboard under one arm. He moved down the aisle like a man who owned not just the aircraft but the narrative. He laughed with the first-class couple in 1A, clapped another gentleman on the shoulder. The flight crew fell into a formation behind him, instinctively quiet. And then, abruptly, he stopped. Right at row 2. Right in front of Leonard. He didn't look at the boarding pass. Didn't ask the attendant. Just looked down. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to make its weight felt. Are you sure you're in the right seat, sir? His tone wasn't loud. It was worse, it was deliberate. Clean. Dressed in courtesy, but soaked in suspicion. Leonard didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just turned the boarding pass over, held it gently between two fingers, and offered it forward. That's what it says, he replied, voice even. McAllister leaned in slightly, looked at the ticket, then at Leonard, then back at the seat. And he smiled. Not the kind of smile that says welcome aboard, but the kind that says you surprised me, and I don't like it. Guest standards aren't what they used to be, he muttered under his breath, but not low enough. Not for it to go unheard. Not for the woman 2 seats across, who turned to glance at her husband. And not for the man across the aisle, mid-30s, casual hoodie, phone already in hand, who instinctively hit record. Just in case. Leonard said nothing. He didn't shift in his seat. Didn't reach for words he didn't need. He simply leaned back, exhaled once, and opened his book. The pilot walked on, never looking back. But the mood did. It shifted. A degree to the left. You could feel it, faint but undeniable. That thin layer of discomfort people pretend not to notice. A boundary had been pushed, but not broken. Not yet. The engines hummed. The flight attendants moved through the safety instructions. People put in headphones, reclined slightly, cracked books, or flipped through phones. But a few eyes kept drifting. To row 2A. To the man with Baldwin on his tray and a spine that never seemed to bend. Leonard turned a page. Slowly. He wasn't reading yet. His eyes skimmed words he knew by heart but couldn't quite absorb. Something had stirred. But not anger. Not outrage. Just the old weight, the one he thought he'd left behind when he retired. The weight of being seen not as a person, but as a puzzle in the wrong place. He knew that weight. Knew it from years of being asked if he worked at the school when he was running it. From being handed car keys outside board meetings. From being congratulated on how articulate he was by donors who still couldn't remember his name. This wasn't new. This was just a uniformed version of the same song. A familiar tune, different verse. The man across the aisle lowered his phone slightly. His wife leaned toward him. "Did you get it?" she whispered. He nodded. "Every second." She frowned. "Do you think we should post it?" "People need to see that," he said. "That's not right." Leonard didn't hear them. He was tracing a sentence in the margin of his book with his thumb. Baldwin had once written, "It took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself, and half believed, before I was able to walk on the earth as though I had a right to be here." Leonard had underlined it back in 1997. With a red pen. He carried that line through school hallways, community forums, contentious board meetings, and the tight-lipped rooms where policy was made and dignity was often rationed. It was his quiet shield. So when the pilot had said what he said, Leonard didn't need to react. His entire life had already responded for him. He leaned back against the headrest, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the hum of the engines surround him. He didn't know the man with the phone had already hit upload. Didn't know a quiet ripple had just been released into a storm-hungry internet. Didn't know that before the plane even reached cruising altitude, his name, or rather, his presence, would begin traveling faster than the aircraft itself. For now, he only knew the silence. The page before him. And the unshaken truth inside him, that he belonged. Fully. Completely. And no one's doubt could ever change that. By the time the wheels left the runway and the city shrank below them, Leonard had returned to his book, tracing Baldwin's words with steady eyes, unaware that just 7 rows behind him, a video was already uploading. Unaware that in a matter of minutes, his quiet moment would ripple far beyond the confines of that aircraft. Unaware that someone's phone, held just above a plastic cup of ginger ale, had captured everything, the stare, the smirk, the condescension disguised as curiosity, and the response that didn't need volume to speak power. The man who recorded it, Noah Washington, 35, graphic designer from Austin, hadn't meant to get involved. He'd just been watching, instinctively disturbed by the pilot's tone, the thin veneer of politeness that couldn't quite cover what everyone else felt. He hit upload without much thought. A simple caption, "This man didn't raise his voice." But maybe he didn't need to. TikTok. Twitter. Reddit. They didn't care about overhead bins or beverage carts. They cared about truth. And truth, especially when caught on camera, doesn't need hashtags to move. It just needs silence to surround it. By the time Flight 762 reached cruising altitude, the clip had already hit 50,000 views. People paused mid-scroll to replay those 6 words, "Guest standards aren't what they used to be." It wasn't the volume. It was the tone. The ease. The shrug behind the insult. Viewers didn't miss it. Nor did they miss the calm dignity with which Leonard responded. Or didn't. He just sat. Sat still. Sat composed. Sat as if his existence in that seat was nothing that needed explanation. Because it wasn't. Across the internet, timelines lit up. A young teacher in Chicago reposted the video with the caption, "This is how Mr. Cross handled it. Grace. Full grace." A father in Detroit wrote, "Showed this to my son. Told him this is how you carry yourself when the world tries to question your place." A former student from Charlotte recognized the face instantly. "That's Dr. Cross. He ran our district. He was always like this. Silent strength." The comments piled up. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. Why did the pilot feel the need to say that? Would he have said the same thing to a white man in that seat? Why does this still happen? It's 2025. Come on. And underneath those, the quieter replies, "It happened to me too. My mom got asked if she was lost in business class. This isn't new. We're just filming it now." Stories emerged from people who had long kept them tucked away. Passengers asked for extra ID in first class, mistaken for staff, stared at during boarding, questioned when ordering champagne. Little things. Quiet things. Things that sat in the margins of memory until one man with a book brought them roaring forward. Meanwhile, back in seat 2A, Leonard remained unaware. He read the same paragraph twice, not because he was distracted, but because the words were too familiar, too necessary. Baldwin had a way of meeting him right where he was. Always had. Even now, at 39,000 feet, the voice of another black man writing decades ago still carried him. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering water and pretzels, their pace a little more measured than before. Something in the front rows felt different. A quiet shift. No one said anything outright. But there were glances. A slight stiffness in the captain's voice during the safety announcement. A growing awareness. In row 3, a teenage girl with pink earbuds paused her music and nudged her mother. "That's the guy from TikTok," she whispered, showing her the clip. Her mom frowned, watched the video, then looked up at the man sitting just ahead of them, peacefully turning a page. "People are already talking about him," she said. In row 5, a flight attendant leaned toward her colleague. "Did you see it?" she asked, voice low. "Yeah," the other whispered. "I saw." By the time the beverage cart reached mid-cabin, the video had hit 200,000 views. A Reddit thread titled "Pilot Questioned This Man's Seat." He answered without a word was climbing the front page. Screenshots of the clip circulated on Instagram and X, where someone had matched Leonard's face to a 2022 Charlotte Observer article about his retirement. Leonard Cross, the educator who changed the game in urban schools. That's when things accelerated. Fast. A former student from Leonard's early years in education posted a side-by-side of him at a school board meeting and the clip from the plane. "He's been teaching us how to rise above since forever," the caption read. A retired teacher commented, "He trained me. Never raised his voice once, but you felt the message in your soul." The algorithms loved it. Loved the contrast. The stoic man with the poetry book. The smug pilot with the sunglasses. The subtle insult. The louder-than-word silence. The video crossed 500,000 by the time the plane began its descent. A message had already reached the airline's corporate office in Atlanta. Then another. A regional manager tagged in a thread. An executive assistant asked to flag and forward all mentions of Flight 762. Interns were pulled from spreadsheets to monitor hashtags. At 38,000 feet, Leonard Cross had no idea any of it was happening. No clue that a voicemail from Captain McAllister, left 2 years ago and long forgotten, was being quietly retrieved by a former flight attendant who still had it saved. "You can file your little complaints if it makes you feel better. They'll still back me. They always do." That voicemail, posted anonymously, added kerosene to a growing fire. Because now it wasn't just one moment, it was a pattern. A system. A culture of quiet dismissiveness wrapped in first-class manners. And Leonard? He was just stretching his legs. Just adjusting his seatbelt. Just sipping ginger ale. The woman across the aisle, Sarah Manning, 42, nonprofit director, finally spoke. "Mr. Cross?" she asked gently. He looked up. "Yes? I think there's something you should know." She handed him her phone. The screen showed the video. His face, frozen mid-glance, just as he lifted the boarding pass. Her thumb scrolled. 1,000,000 views. Headlines. Educators' poise goes viral after pilot's question. Leonard blinked once. Then again. "This is me?" he asked. She nodded. "It's everywhere. People are talking." He stared at it, quiet. Then exhaled. "I suppose that makes sense." "Aren't you upset?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not upset. Just aware." When the plane landed in San Francisco, Leonard waited for others to exit. No rush. No statement. No demand for apology. He moved with the same calm that brought him on board. But behind him, the captain sat in the cockpit, eyes fixed forward, unaware that a tidal wave had already begun on the ground. On the tarmac, Leonard stepped into the terminal with his book still in hand. He didn't check his phone. Didn't open social media. But everywhere around him, people were. Watching. Sharing. Reposting. Respecting. A quiet revolution, launched by a man who said very little, yet somehow said everything. When Leonard stepped off Flight 762 and into the chilled terminal air of San Francisco International, his phone was already buzzing. He ignored it. Not out of rudeness, just habit. After all, he hadn't boarded that flight to check notifications or chase headlines. He boarded to rest, to reflect, to watch the clouds roll by and read Baldwin in silence. But silence doesn't always stay silent, especially when dignity meets a lens. Especially when grace becomes public. By the time he reached baggage claim, the video had crossed 1,000,000 views. By the time he reached his hotel, cable news anchors were dissecting the pilot's tone frame by frame. And by morning, his name, Leonard Cross, was in every major headline from coast to coast. He sat by the window of his room with a cup of black coffee and the same book on his lap. Outside, San Francisco yawned into morning traffic, oblivious to what had taken place 35,000 feet above Dallas. Leonard scrolled slowly through the messages. Emails from former students. Voicemails from local news stations. A comment from someone he hadn't heard from in 2 decades. "You always taught us that calm doesn't mean weak. I finally understand what you meant." He smiled faintly. Not wide. Just enough. He didn't answer most messages. He didn't need to. But one request stood out. A journalist named Alicia Monroe from the Bay Area had sent a single-line email. "I don't want a soundbite, Mr. Cross. I want to hear your truth." There was something honest in that. Something different. So, 2 days after the flight, Leonard agreed. No podium. No stage. Just 2 chairs in a quiet community center gym. A single camera. Alicia didn't come with a crew, just a notebook, a voice recorder, and a steady, listening presence. She started gently. "Mr. Cross, when you boarded that plane, did you ever imagine you'd be sitting here talking about it on camera?" Leonard chuckled once, low in his throat. "I imagined a cold drink and a quiet seat. That's about it." "When the pilot questioned you," she asked, "what went through your mind?" He paused. "I've been asked if I belonged in places my whole life. That one just had wings." She blinked, then slowly nodded. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't argue." "Because I wasn't surprised," he said. "And because I didn't need to. I wasn't there to teach anyone a lesson. I was there to rest. To sit in a seat I paid for. And no one's doubt ever changed my truth." That clip, those 30 seconds, broke the internet again. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. It was restraint. It was power. It was clarity in an era where shouting often gets the most attention. But Leonard's voice didn't need to be loud to be heard. He spoke of little moments, being mistaken for the janitor when he was the principal, being ignored in meetings until someone realized he was the one leading them. But he didn't speak with bitterness. Just tired truth. Quiet fatigue. "I'm not here to punish anyone," he said. "But I do think systems should learn." The interview aired online and then on national news within hours. Letters poured in. Not just comments. Handwritten letters. Emails from teachers, veterans, students, strangers. One woman wrote, "I watched that clip 10 times before I realized I've been apologizing for my own presence for years." Another said, "Because of you, I sat in first class this morning and didn't flinch when someone stared." And while all that unfolded, the airline scrambled. Their first statement was bland: "We are aware of the situation on Flight 762 and are conducting an internal review." It did nothing. The pressure mounted. Screenshots of past posts surfaced. Internal complaints. A culture of quiet bias. A leaked voicemail from McAllister, cocky and dismissive. The internet had receipts, and it wasn't letting go. Within days, public demand forced action. Captain Evan McAllister was placed on administrative leave. No press conference. Just a line in an internal memo. But it didn't stop there. The airline announced sweeping reforms. A full audit of conduct protocols. Mandatory inclusivity training. A rewritten passenger rights policy. And at the center of it, the cross standard. Leonard wasn't thrilled with the name. "I didn't write any code," he said when asked. "I just sat down." But he understood the point. It wasn't about branding, it was about raising the floor. About making respect the default, not the exception. Other airlines soon followed. Quietly, but clearly. Updated training. Revised manuals. Whispered acknowledgments that something had shifted. Because when one man stays seated with dignity, the ripple can become a wave. Leonard returned home to Charlotte without a crowd, without cameras, just a soft breeze rustling the oak trees lining his neighborhood. His modest home hadn't changed. The porch swing still creaked the same way it had since his wife picked it out back in '94. Inside, the walls were lined with framed photos, students in caps and gowns, teachers he'd mentored, his daughters beaming with pride, and one photo of Gloria, his late wife, smiling beside him during a conference in D.C. He dropped his blazer on the hook, set the book on the coffee table, and sank into his old recliner, the one he used to grade papers in, long after everyone else had gone to bed. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Instead, he turned on the jazz station, Coltrane, slow and steady, and let the sound fill the space. That evening, his granddaughter Ava climbed onto his lap. 8 years old. Curious. Wide-eyed. "Grandpa," she said, "Mommy said you were on the news." He chuckled. "I suppose I was." "Did you do something bad?" she asked. "No, baby," he said softly. "I just sat down." She tilted her head. "But why were people mad?" He paused. "Because sometimes, people don't expect to see someone like me in a place like that. And when they do, it makes them uncomfortable." She frowned. "That's silly." He smiled. "It is. But it's been happening for a long time." She thought for a moment. "You didn't yell. You just stayed sitting. That's kinda cool." Leonard kissed her forehead. "Sometimes, baby girl, staying still is the loudest thing you can do." The weeks passed. The hashtags faded. But the changes stayed. Airlines kept the cross standard. Policies were revised. And once a month, Leonard received a letter. Always from someone new. A young black teacher. A retired Air Force pilot. A college student. Each one said the same thing in their own way: "I saw the video. I saw how you stayed calm. And because of that, I didn't shrink the next time someone questioned me." He never posted about it. never went on speaking tours. But he always wrote back. A short note. Sometimes a quote. And always, in his own hand, "You are enough. Let them adjust." Because Leonard Cross didn't change the world with outrage. He changed it with presence. With stillness. With quiet, unwavering truth. In a culture that rewards loudness, he reminded everyone that character speaks louder than volume. And sometimes, just sitting in your seat, knowing you belong, is the most radical act of all. As the author of this story, I want to share a reflection that goes beyond the headlines, the viral clips, and even the policy changes that followed. What happened to Leonard Cross wasn't just about one moment on a plane, it was about a lifetime of moments that many people quietly endure. The difference here is that this time, the world noticed. And more importantly, it listened. The lesson is simple, yet profound. You don't always have to raise your voice to raise the bar. Leonard didn't respond with rage or retaliation. He didn't clap back or demand a spotlight. Instead, he sat in quiet, powerful dignity. That presence, rooted in self-respect, history, and calm awareness, spoke louder than any argument ever could. So often, people, especially those from marginalized communities, are expected to explain, justify, or prove their worth in spaces where their presence is questioned. Leonard's story is a reminder that you don't have to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You don't have to match someone's disrespect to assert your humanity. Just as he told his granddaughter, sometimes, staying still is the loudest thing you can do. But this story is also a call to action, for all of us. It's a reminder to pay attention. To speak up when we see something unjust. It wasn't Leonard who uploaded that video. It was a fellow passenger who recognized the moment for what it was. Allyship matters. Witnessing matters. Accountability matters. Whether you've been the one questioned or the one watching from across the aisle, we all have a part to play in making the spaces we share more just and more human. To our viewers and listeners here at Us, Justice Stories, thank you. Thank you for choosing stories that challenge, uplift, and remind us of our shared responsibility. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to reflect on where you sit in your own life, not just physically, but morally. And the next time someone's presence is questioned, remember Leonard Cross. Remember that silence can be strength. That dignity disrupts bias. And that you are enough, exactly as you are. Please like, share, and subscribe to us, Justice Stories, if you want more real stories that move us, teach us, and bring light to the everyday moments where character is revealed. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for listening.